Hello, first graders. Day 2 of our fairy tale project today. So I'm going to read another one of Grimm's fairy tales. And today the focus is going to be on characters. So yesterday, hopefully, you listened to The Fisherman and His Wife, which is my favorite, which really does a great job of describing the setting. And hopefully you picked the setting that you think your fairy tale would take place in. Today, I'm going to read another fairy tale. This one has a lot of really interesting characters. So you can think about some of these characters as inspiration for maybe characters you'll include in your own fairy tale. Or maybe you already have ideas of the type of people or animals or things that you want to be characters in your story. So the fairy tale I'm going to read today is called Snowdrop, which you may not recognize the title, but I can almost promise you that you'll recognize the story. So see if you can know this story by another title. I bet you will. But in this book, it's called Snowdrop. And here's the first picture. Maybe that will already give you a hint of what Snowdrop might be about. It was the middle of winter, and the snowflakes were falling from the sky like feathers. Now, a queen sat sewing at a window framed in black ebony, and as she sewed, she looked up into the snow. Suddenly, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell onto the snow. And the red looked so lovely on the white that she thought to herself, if only I had a child as white as snow, and as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame. Soon after, she had a daughter, whose hair was black as ebony, while her cheeks were red as blood, and her skin as white as snow. So she was called Snowdrop. But when the child was born, the queen died. After a year, the king took another wife. She was a handsome woman, but proud and overbearing, and could not endure that anyone else would surpass her in beauty. She had a magic looking-glass, and when she stood before it and looked at herself, she used to say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" Then the glass answered, "Queen, you are the fairest of them all." Sound familiar yet? Then she was content, for she knew that the looking-glass spoke the truth. But Snowdrop grew up and became more and more beautiful, so that when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as the day and far surpassed the queen. Once, when she asked her glass, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" it answered, "Queen, you are the fairest here, I hold, but Snowdrop is fairer 1,000-fold." Then the queen was horror-struck and turned green and yellow with jealousy. From the hour that she saw Snowdrop, her heart sank, and she hated the little girl. The pride and envy of her heart grew like a weed, so that she had no rest day nor night. At last she called a huntsman and said, "Take the child out into the wood. I will not set eyes on her again. You will kill her and bring me her lungs as tokens." Ew, first of all, this woman is very mean. But if you don't recognize it yet, this is the story of Snow White. But it has a different name in this book. It's called Snowdrop. The huntsman obeyed and took Snowdrop out into the forest. But when he drew his hunting knife and was prepared to plunge it into her innocent heart, she began to cry, "Alas, dear huntsman, spare my life, and I'll run away into the wild forest and never come back again." And because of her beauty, the huntsman had pity on her and said, "Well, run away, poor child. Wild beasts will probably soon devour you," he thought. But still he felt as though the weight were lifted from his heart because he had not been obliged to kill her. And as, just at that moment, a young fawn came leaping by, he pierced it and took the lungs as tokens to the queen. The cook was ordered to serve them up in pickle, and the wicked queen ate them. Now the poor child was alone in the great wood with no living soul near, and she was so frightened that she knew not what to do. Then she began to run and run over the sharp stones and through the brambles while the animals passed her without harming her. She ran as far as her feet could carry her till it was nearly evening. When she saw a little house, she went in it to rest. Inside, everything was small, but as neat and clean as could be. A small table covered with white cloth stood ready with 7 small plates, and by every plate was a spoon, knife, fork, and cup. 7 little beds were ranged by the walls, covered with snow-white coverlets. As Snowdrop was very hungry and thirsty, she ate a little bread and vegetable from each plate and drank a little water from each cup, for she did not want to eat the whole of the portion. Then, being very tired, she lay down on one of the beds. She tried them all, but none suited her. One was too short, one too long, all except the 7th, which was just right. She remained in it, said her prayers, and fell asleep. When it was quite dark, the masters of the house came in. They were 7 dwarfs, who worked in the mountains digging for ore. They kindled their lights, and as soon as they could see, they noticed that someone had been there, for everything was not in order which they left it. The first said, "Who's been sitting in my chair?" The second said, "Who's been eating off my plate?" The third said, "Who's been nibbling my bread?" The fourth said, "Who's been eating my vegetables?" The fifth said, "Who has been using my fork?" The sixth said, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The seventh said, "Who has been drinking out of my cup?" Then the first looked and saw the slight impression on the bed and said, "Who has been treading on my bed?" The others came up running and said, "And mine, and mine." But the seventh, when he looked into his bed, saw Snowdrop, who lay there asleep. He called the others, who came up and cried out with astonishment as they held their lights and gazed at Snowdrop. "Heavens, what a beautiful child," they said, and they were so delighted that they did not wake her, but let her sleep in bed. And the seventh dwarf slept with his comrades an hour with each all through the night. That sort of reminded me of Goldilocks, too, when the bears come back and say, "Who's been sitting in my chair?" When morning came, Snowdrop woke up, and when she saw the seven dwarfs, she was frightened, but they were very kind and asked her name. "I'm called Snowdrop," she answered. "How did you get into our house?" they asked. Then she told them how her stepmother had wished to get rid of her, how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run all day to find the house. Then the dwarf said, "Will you look after our household, cook and make the beds, wash, sew, and knit, and keep everything neat and clean? If so, you shall stay with us and want for nothing." "Yes," said Snowdrop, "with all my heart." So she stayed with them and kept the house in order. In the morning they went to the mountain and searched for copper and gold, and in the evening they came back and had their meal ready. All day the maiden was alone, and the good dwarfs warned her and said, "Beware of your stepmother, who will soon learn that you are here. Don't let anyone in." The queen, having, as she imagined, eaten Snowdrop's liver, and felt certain that she was the fairest of them all, stepped in front of her glass and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The glass answered as usual, "Queen, you are fairest here, I hold, but Snowdrop over the fells, who with the seven dwarf dwells, is fairer still 1,000-fold." She was dismayed, for she knew that the glass told no lies, and she saw that the hunter had deceived her, and that Snowdrop lived. Accordingly, she began to wonder afresh how she might compass her death. For as long as she was not the fairest in the land, her jealous heart left her no rest. At last she thought of a plan. She dyed her face and dressed up like an old peddler, so that she was not quite recognizable. In the disguise, she crossed over the 7 mountains to the home of the 7 dwarfs, and called out, "Wares for sale?" Snowdrop peeped out the window and said, "Good day, mother, what have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," she answered, "laces of every color," and she held out one which was made of the brightest silk. "I may let the honest woman in," thought Snowdrop, and she unbolted the door and bought the pretty lace. "Child," said the old woman, "what a sight you are! I will lace you properly for once." Snowdrop made no objection. She placed herself before the old woman and let her lace her with new lace. But the old woman laced so quickly and tightly that she took away Snowdrop's breath, and she fainted. "Now I am the fairest," she said to herself, and hurried away. Not long after, the 7 dwarfs came home, and they were horror-struck when they saw their dear Snowdrop lying on the floor without stirring. When they saw that she was laced too tightly, they cut the lace, whereupon she began to breathe, and soon came back to life again. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said that the old woman was no other than the wicked queen. "Take care not to let anyone in when we are not here," they said. Now the wicked queen, as soon as she got home, went to the glass and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And it answered as usual, "Queen, you are fairest here, I hold, but Snowdrop over the fells, who with the 7 dwarf dwells, is fairer still 1,000-fold." When she heard it all, her blood flew to her heart. She was so enraged, for she knew that Snowdrop had come back to life again. Then she thought to herself, "I must plan something which will put an end to her." By means of witchcraft, which she was very skilled, she made a poisoned comb. Next she disguised herself and took the form of a different old woman. She crossed the mountains and came to the home of the 7 dwarfs and knocked at the door, calling out, "Good wares to sell." Snowdrop looked out the window and said, "Go away, I must not let anyone in." "At least you may look," answered the old woman, and she took the poisoned comb and held it up. Snowdrop was so pleased with it that she let herself be tricked and opened the door. Not a good idea, Snowdrop. When she had made the bargain, the old woman said, "Now I will comb your hair properly." Poor Snowdrop, suspecting no evil, which she should be suspecting evil, let the old woman have her way, but scarcely was the poisoned comb fixed on her hair than the poison took effect, and the maiden fell down unconscious. "You paragon of beauty," said the wicked woman, "now it's all over for you." And away she went. Happily, it was near the time when the 7 dwarfs came home. When they saw Snowdrop lying on the ground as though dead, they immediately suspected her stepmother and searched till they found the poisoned comb. No sooner had they removed it than Snowdrop came to be herself again, and related what had happened. They warned her again to be on her guard, and to open the door to no one. When she got home, the queen stood before her glass and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And it answered as usual, "Queen, you were the fairest here, I hold, but Snowdrop over the fells, who with the 7 dwarf dwells, is fairer still 1,000-fold." When she heard the glass speak these words, she trembled and quivered with rage. "Snowdrop shall die," she said, "even if it costs me my own life." Thereupon she went to a secret room, which no one had entered but herself, and made a poisonous apple. Outwardly it was beautiful to look upon, with rosy cheeks, and everyone who saw it longed for it, but whoever ate it was certain to die. When the apple was ready, she dyed her face and dressed herself like an old peasant woman, and so crossed the 7 hills to the dwarf's home. There she knocked. Snowdrop put her head out of the window and said, "I must not let anyone in. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me." "It is all the same to me," said the peasant woman. "I will soon get rid of my apples. There, I will give one to you." "No, I must not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" said the woman. "See, I will cut the apple in half. You will eat the red side, and I will keep the other." Now the apple was so cunningly painted that the red half alone was poisoned. Snowdrop longed for the apple, and when she saw the peasant woman eating, she could hold out no longer. She stretched out her hand and took the poisoned half. Scarcely had she bit it into her than she fell dead to the ground. The queen looked with a fiendish glance and laughed aloud and said, "White as snow, red as blood, and black as ebony, this time the dwarfs cannot wake you again." And when she got home, she asked the looking-glass, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And it answered at last, "Queen, you were the fairest of them all." Then her jealous heart was at rest, as much rest as a jealous heart can be. The dwarfs, when they came at evening, found Snowdrop lying on the ground, and not a breath escaped her lips, and she was quite dead. They lifted her up and looked to see whether any poison was to be found, unlaced her dress, combed her hair, washed her with water, but it was no use. Their dear child was dead. They laid her on the bier, and all 7 sat down and bewailed her and lamented over her for 3 whole days. Then they prepared to bury her, but she looked so fresh and living and still had such beautiful rosy cheeks that they said, "We cannot bury her in the dark earth." And so they had a glass coffin made so they could see her from every side. They laid her inside and wrote on it in letters of gold, her name and how she was the king's daughter. Then they set the coffin out on the mountain, and one of them always stayed with it and watched, and the birds came too and mourned for Snowdrop, first an owl, then a raven, and lastly a dove. Now Snowdrop lay a long, long time in her coffin, looking as though she were asleep. It happened that a prince was wandering in the wood and came to the home of the 7 dwarfs to pass the night. He saw the coffin on the mountain and lovely Snowdrop inside, and read what was written in golden letters. Then he said to the dwarfs, "Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you like for it." But they said, "We will not give it up for all the gold in the world." Then he said, "Then give it to me as a gift, for I cannot live without Snowdrop to gaze upon, and I will honor and revere it as my dearest treasure." When he had said these words, the good dwarfs pitied him and gave him the coffin. The prince bade his servants carry it over their shoulders. Now it happened that they stumbled over some brushwood, and the shock dislodged the piece of apple from Snowdrop's throat. In a short time she opened her eyes, lifted the lid of the coffin, and sat up and came back to life completely. "Oh, heaven, where am I?" she asked. The prince, full of joy, said, "You are with me." And he related what had happened, and said, "I love you better than all the world." Snowdrop went with him, and their wedding was celebrated with great magnificence. Snowdrop's wicked stepmother was invited to the feast, and when she had put on her fine clothes and stepped into the mirror, she asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" The glass answered, "Queen, you are the fairest here I hold, but the young queen is fairer still 1,000-fold." Then the wicked woman uttered a curse and was so terribly frightened that she did not know what to do. Yet she had no rest. She felt obliged to go and see the young queen. And when she came, she recognized Snowdrop and stood stock still with fear and terror. But iron slippers were heated over the fire and were soon brought to it with tongs and put before her, and she had to step into the red-hot shoes and burn her feet. And that is the end of Snowdrop. So it's similar to Snow White, has 7 dwarfs, the poison apple, the movie. But it's a little bit different. Now there's a poison comb. There are some other aspects to it as well. Snowdrop has some very interesting characters. Snowdrop herself, of course. Then there's the wicked queen who is very vain and wants to be the prettiest one of all. Then there are the 7 dwarfs who are kind and take care of her. And then there's the prince who comes along at the end too. That seems to happen in most fairy tales, that a prince just comes along at the end and happens to save Snow White. So think about what type of characters you would like to include in your fairy tale. Maybe you want a princess, maybe you want some dwarfs, or a wicked queen, or a prince, or a king. You could also think of the fisherman and his wife. They were just 2 regular people. Maybe it could be some animals that talk, like the flounder. So today, take the next page in your writing journal and write all about the characters that you will include in your story. Start with the main character, who you want your fairy tale to be about. And then you can add some other characters, maybe a villain, a bad guy, or bad woman in your story. So today, write all about your characters. Tomorrow, we'll add another element. See you then. Bye.